India just landed on a part of the moon no country had ever reached. And they did it for less than the budget of a Hollywood movie. $75 million. That's what it cost. NASA's Artemis program? Over $90 billion. And here's where it gets embarrassing for everyone else. India's little rover, 26 kilograms, about the weight of a golden retriever, found something at the lunar South Pole that decades of billion-dollar orbiters completely missed. Sulfur, confirmed on the surface. First time ever at that location. No orbiter from any nation could detect it. You had to be there, on the ground, firing lasers at moon dirt, and India was the only one who showed up. But that's not even the big discovery, because weeks later the data got stranger. The moon started shaking. 50 unexplained tremors in 12 days. On a world we've been calling geologically dead for decades. And buried deeper in the data, something almost nobody is talking about yet. India's rover parked itself on top of material blasted up from 200 kilometers beneath the moon's surface. Primordial rock, 4.3 billion years old. Formed before the first living cell ever existed on Earth. Now here's why this matters beyond the science. Every major space power on the planet, NASA, China, Japan, is now using India's data to plan their own missions. The country that spent the least is drawing the map for a trillion-dollar space race. It starts with a laser and a patch of dirt. But first, you need to know what makes the moon's South Pole the most fought-over piece of real estate in the solar system. Every major space agency on Earth is aiming at the same tiny region. Not the equator where Apollo landed half a century ago. The South Pole. And they're not going for flags and footprints this time. They're going because of what's hiding in the shadows. See, the moon barely tilts on its axis. Just 1.5 degrees. Earth tilts 23.5. That tiny difference changes everything. At the moon's South Pole, the sun never climbs high. It schemes along the crater rims like a flashlight held at ankle height. And the crater floors? Total darkness. Not nighttime darkness. Permanent darkness. Sunlight has literally never touched some of those surfaces. Not once in over 4 billion years. These frozen pits act like cosmic freezers. And inside them, scientists believe there's water ice. Potentially millions of tons of it. Now, water on the moon isn't just interesting for science. Split water into hydrogen and oxygen and you've got rocket fuel. Whoever controls the water controls the refueling station between Earth and everywhere else. This is why NASA, China, and now India are all racing to the exact same spot. And about that race, at least 6 missions have tried to land at or near the South Pole. Most failed. 4 days before India's attempt, Russia tried. Lunar, 25, their first lunar mission in almost 50 years, crashed, slammed into the surface on approach. Then India, whose entire space budget is a rounding error compared to NASA's, stuck the landing perfectly. One more thing about where India landed. The South Pole Aitken Basin, one of the largest impact craters in the entire solar system. About 2,500 kilometers across and 8 kilometers deep. You could fit the entire landmass of India inside this single scar on the moon. That's where they decided to go looking, and what they found started a chain reaction that hasn't stopped. Within days of touching down, India's Pragyan rover got to work. It carried a laser instrument called LIBS, and it does exactly what it sounds like. You fire a high-powered laser at the moon's surface. The beam is intense enough to vaporize rock into a glowing cloud of plasma. And here's the clever part. Every element glows at a slightly different wavelength. Sulfur has its own color signature. Iron has its own. Aluminum has its own. Read the colors, read the recipe. It's like shining a blacklight at a crime scene, except this blacklight is hot enough to turn stone into gas. When they pointed it at the South Pole soil, they found the usual suspects. Aluminum, calcium, iron, titanium, silicon, oxygen, all expected. But then the instrument picked up something else. Sulfur, right there on the surface. Confirmed. Unambiguous. Here's why that matters more than it sounds. Dozens of orbiters from NASA, the European Space Agency, China, and even India's own previous missions had flown over this region for years. Not one detected sulfur. Turns out, orbital instruments just can't pick it up from that distance. The signal gets lost. You literally had to land a rover on the dirt and zap it point blank. India did. Nobody else had. But here's where it gets even more interesting. On Earth, sulfur shows up near volcanoes. Finding it here hints at ancient volcanic activity that nobody had direct evidence for at this location. And the practical angle is even wilder. Sulfur melts at about 120 degrees Celsius. That's just slightly higher than the lunar surface temperature during the day. You can melt it and use it as a binding agent, kind of like a natural cement that works in the moon's existing conditions. India didn't just find a curious element. They found a potential building material for lunar bases, just sitting on the ground, free of charge. And that was just one instrument on one rover during the first few days. The lander had its own surprise waiting. The Vikram lander carried a thermal probe called Chaste. It did something no mission had ever done. It took direct temperature readings beneath the surface at the moon's south pole. And what it measured was staggering. The surface swings from around 80 degrees Celsius during the day to negative 170 at night. A 250-degree swing, going from boiling water to almost twice as cold as the worst temperature ever recorded in Antarctica. Same patch of ground, within hours. But here's what nobody expected. Just a few centimeters below the surface, the temperature barely moves. The lunar soil is an absurdly powerful insulator. Think of burying a thermometer at the beach on a scorching day. The sand's burning on top, but dig down a few inches and it's cool. Now multiply that effect by 100. That's the moon, and this rewrote the playbook. Scientists had assumed water ice could only survive in permanently shadowed craters. Those frozen pits where sunlight never reaches. Turns out, the soil is such a good insulator that water ice can stay stable even on sloped terrain. How much slope? About 14 degrees. That's barely a hill. A wheelchair ramp is steeper than that. And that's enough to keep ice frozen underneath, even in areas that get some sunlight. The map of where water might exist on the moon didn't get a small update. It got dramatically redrawn. And every space agency in the world took notice. NASA's Artemis landing site plans? Being revised. China's Chang'e 7 target zones? Informed by this data. India's $75 million mission just redrew the treasure map for a competition worth hundreds of billions. So India found sulfur, found building materials, rewrote the water ice map. Scientists were still processing all of that. Then the moon started shaking. Vikram carried a seismometer called ILSA. Over 12 days of operation, it recorded over 250 vibration events. About 200 were easy to explain. The rover rolling around, instruments operating, mechanical noise. But roughly 50 of them, unexplained, natural, coming from the moon itself, for tremors per day, on a world that most textbooks describe as geologically dead. It's like putting a stethoscope on a patient everyone assumed was long gone, and hearing a faint heartbeat. This is the first seismic data ever collected from the South Pole, and the first new moonquake measurements from anywhere on the moon since the Apollo missions. Last time anyone listened for moonquakes, Nixon was in the White House. That's a 50-year silence. India broke it. The leading theory is thermal stress. Those extreme temperature swings cause the crust to expand and contract, kind of like a house creaking in winter. But some researchers aren't satisfied with that explanation alone. Some of the signals don't fit the pattern. The South Pole may be more geologically active than anyone assumed. Something is happening beneath the surface. And that question, what's actually down there, is what leads us to the biggest finding of the entire mission. The one that took scientists over a year to fully process. The tremors hinted that the subsurface was unusual. The chemistry confirmed it. India's rover carried a second analysis tool. Think of it as a chemical fingerprint reader. It bombards the surface with particles and reads the X-rays that bounce back. Different elements produce different signatures. And the readings from the landing site were strange. Sodium and potassium levels? Unusually low. Sulfur? Unusually high. That's a very specific fingerprint. At first, it looked like a surface anomaly, just weird chemistry. But as scientists matched it against geological models, the picture became clear. About 4.3 billion years ago, an asteroid slammed into the moon with almost unimaginable force. The impact carved out that massive crater 2,500 kilometers wide. But it didn't just scrape the surface. It punched through the crust, through the upper mantle, and scooped out rock from 200 kilometers down. That's roughly the distance from the Earth's surface to the boundary of outer space. Except going downward, into the moon. The impact scattered that deep material across the surrounding landscape like shrapnel from a cosmic bomb. And then nothing happened. For 4.3 billion years, that material just sat there. No weather to erode it. No tectonic plates to swallow it. Undisturbed, in the cold and the dark. Until a 26-kilogram rover from India rolled over it and fired a laser at it. What they were looking at wasn't ordinary surface dust. It was primitive mantle rock. Material from the moon's deep interior. A geological time capsule from before life existed anywhere. Older than DNA. Older than photosynthesis. Formed before biology was invented. India accidentally parked its rover on top of the moon's black box. And here's a detail that gave scientists chills. The landing site itself, named Shiv Shakti Point, was confirmed at about 3.7 billion years old. That number isn't random. 3.7 billion years is precisely when life first appeared on Earth. The moon's surface and the first living cells on our planet, locked to the same moment on the cosmic clock. We don't know if that's a coincidence. We also don't know that it isn't. So what does all of this actually add up to? Because India's mission didn't just produce science papers. It produced the single most valuable ground truth dataset from the moon's south pole in existence. And every major space program in the world is now building their plans around Indian data. Start with NASA. The Artemis program has spent over $90 billion so far. They still haven't landed a human on the moon. Artemis 2, the crewed flyby, just rolled to the launch pad in early 2026. The actual landing pushed to 2028 at the earliest. And the thermal and compositional data they need to finalize landing sites? A significant chunk came from India, the country that spent over 1,000 times less. Then there's China. Chang'e 7 launches in 2026, sending a lander and a hopping robot. A small probe designed to leap into permanently shadowed craters and hunt for water ice. Their site selection? Informed by Chandrayaan-3's South Pole data. China's targeting a crewed lunar landing by 2030 and a permanent research station by 2035 in partnership with Russia. Russia, whose own attempt at the South Pole ended in a smoking crater 4 days before India nailed the landing. Not exactly a confidence-building start to a partnership. Meanwhile, India isn't sitting still. Chandrayaan-4 has been approved by the Indian government. $250 million, about 3 times the Chandrayaan-3 budget. Still less than a single Starship test flight. This time, it's a sample return mission. The plan is to land near Mons Mouton, even closer to the South Pole. Collect up to 3 kilograms of lunar regolith. Fly it back to Earth. 3 kilograms. About a handful of moon dirt. But if that handful contains the primordial mantle material Chandrayaan-3 identified, it could be the most scientifically valuable material ever returned from the moon. More revealing than anything Apollo brought back. Because Apollo never went to the South Pole. Apollo never touched 4.3 billion-year-old rock from 200 kilometers deep. If India pulls this off, they join the US, Russia, and China as only the 4th nation to bring back pieces of another world. The underdog isn't just competing anymore. The underdog is becoming the one everyone else has to go through. But what does all of this mean beyond the rivalry? Because this isn't really about India versus NASA versus China. It's about what the moon's South Pole represents for every human being alive. If there's accessible water ice down there, and India's data says the ice zone is far bigger than anyone mapped before, the moon becomes humanity's first off-world gas station. Spacecraft heading to Mars don't have to haul all their fuel from Earth. They stop at the moon, extract water, split it into hydrogen and oxygen, rocket fuel, made on the moon. Deep space exploration stops being a question of if and becomes a question of when. Now picture this. Robots mining ice on crater slopes, processing plants splitting water into propellant, launch pads on the rim, infrastructure built with sulfur cement that India proved is lying on the ground, following a water map that India drew, on a surface whose deep history India was the first to uncover. The Outer Space Treaty says no nation can claim sovereignty over the moon. That's still the law, but there's nothing stopping a country from being first to operate there. First to build the extraction infrastructure. First to set the norms for how it all works. The rules get written by whoever shows up. And India showed up, not with the biggest budget, not with the most powerful rocket, with a 26-kilogram rover, a laser, and $75 million. They delivered more ground truth science from the moon's south pole than any mission in history, found building materials, expanded the water map, discovered the moon is still trembling, and uncovered primordial rock that's been waiting in silence for 4.3 billion years. The space race used to be about who could reach the moon. That race ended in 1969. The new race is about who understands what's there. And right now, nobody understands it better than India. If this shifted how you think about the moon, drop a comment with what surprised you most. And if you want to stay ahead on what's really happening in the space race, the discoveries, the rivalries, the things that don't make the evening news, subscribe. We cover it every week.